Welcome back to Out of the Blue, and today we're talking about putting your pieces together. So now we're stitching all the sections together. So as you can see, we have the center section stitched. We're going to be doing the bottom border and applying that to the center section. So we have the center section done here, and all we have to do is, the instructions are very clear what you square your pieces up to. So you'll have squared your piece up, it's all ready to be stitched on, it's been blocked. So now you want to line up your edges just like you're making a quilt. And put pins in, one on each end. If you haven't done quilts before, you know that you do the ends and then the center, and then pins on each side so that you have everything where it needs to be. You don't want your pieces moving around. This is a lot of thickness. We have our stabilizer on the back. We have the thickness of the wool. So you want to make sure that all your pieces align. You have some pins in there to keep it where it needs to be, and then we're going to go to the sewing machine. And with a regular stitch length that you normally would use, but I do suggest a walking foot. I feel that this is a necessary part of putting together wool because it's got the thickness and it's going to want to push apart. So we're just going to start on the edge. We're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So if you're used to 1/4 inch, this is going to be a little bit different that for you. You're going to be using a 1/2 inch, so you'll want to take a couple stitches and reverse to get that locked. And then as you go, just take your time, make sure all the pieces, the edges line up, and just go right through. When you get to the seam allowance, make sure your seam allowances are laying flat. Mine doubled up, so I have to make sure I get it back underneath of there. So I'm just going to go along and stitch that 1/2 inch seam allowance.
And Mom, you're sewing over pins.
Yes, I don't usually sew over pins, do I? All right, so when I come to pins, I take them out. Katie sews right over the top of them sometimes. So if you're going slow, I think sometimes it will allow it, but these are the nice, really fine, cool pins. I love them. They're so fine that they keep your pieces right where they're supposed to be till you get to them. So I know that the edge of my walking foot is exactly a 1/2 inch, so I have a place to guide as I go. If you don't, you maybe want to put a piece of tape on your sewing machine, or because we're just not used to using. I am going to leave that pin in that seam because I want it to line up just perfect. There we go. And as I get to the end, I'm going to make sure my pieces are exactly the way they're supposed to be, and just work my way right to that end. It's as simple as that, sewing a quilt together. I might leave that pin in too to keep it exactly right to the end. So now I've got my seam stitched. The next thing I would do is I would go to my sewing machine and set the steam.
Go into your ironing board.
Or go into the ironing board and set that. Make sure you give it a good press and set. And then you're going to want to press those seams open. So I'm going to turn it over and show you how we have pressed all our seams open. And so just with a fair pressing sheet, and I have one of those right here. I'm going to slide over and grab it. I would put that right over the top and steam, steam, steam. Get it really nice and pressed from the back. You'll want to press that from the back. You will not want to press that seam from the front because it'll show on the front of your quilt then, only from the back. So as you get it pressed, it will make a beautifully flat piece. If you press this from the front now, that would raise this here, and you would have a very raised part where your seam is. So then we go back, and following Katie's instructions, you'll be adding more embroidery that overlaps the seams. But that's as simple as it is. It's so simple to sew these pieces together. There's just a few seams, and you'll be opening them up and sewing all your pieces together. So that is our tutorial for this week, stitching your pieces together. Thanks for joining us.